Members of the jury, did y'all hear that bass? I'm gonna have to record something on my cello and see how we can incorporate that into our intro. But that was nice.
Absolutely.
Portia Chiffon Venable, it's great to see you. How you doing this evening?
Holding steady. It's good to be back in the number, as the old black ladies in church say. I was down and out last month, so I'm sorry I missed everybody, but I'm glad to be back.
Well, we are so glad that you are here. And this evening, we're having a conversation that is really particular to New Orleans. You all might know that our work is actually nationwide. I'm based in New Orleans. Portia Chiffon is based in the Bronx and in New York. But the work and the conversation about the juries is really applicable regardless of what state you're in. So tonight's conversation is going to be about the types of positions that people in New Orleans are voting for. And we want to break down what do those positions do? How are they connected to the criminal legal system? And if there is a connection to our juries, what does that look like? So we're going to be breaking those positions down. One of the things that we won't be doing tonight is talking about any particular candidates. We are here just to provide information about what these different roles actually do so that you can be an informed voter. And you know that we have a little tagline that we've been working on. We believe that an informed citizen is an informed juror. But why should we stop at being an informed juror? We want you to be an informed voter as well. So before I get into that, I just want to take a temperature check to make sure people know to ask your questions. We have some suspicions that you have questions about these positions and these roles, and both Portia Chiffon and I are ready and able to answer those questions. So Portia Chiffon, can you tell us what are the types of positions that are on the ballot in New Orleans for this election cycle?
You are such a professor. I feel like you'd be using the Socratic method on me. But there are a few positions. I know that the focus has been on the new mayor of New Orleans, but there are other positions that are up for grabs or up for election in New Orleans. That's city council seats, that's sheriff, that's a censor, and that's city clerk of the criminal court. Those are the positions that are up for election.
That's right. Some of you may have already voted in New Orleans because we had an early voting period. If you didn't early vote, we have voting on this Saturday, October 11th. As Portia Chiffon indicated, there's going to be the election for the mayor, city council, the assessor, the sheriff, and the clerk of court as it relates to our criminal district court. So let's break those down. And before we do, I just want to provide a reminder of the relationship of our government from a civics perspective and the branches of government. So just like we have on the federal level, we have a separation of powers on the state level and on the city level. So the mayor, that's the executive branch for the most part, right? That's going to be our local representation of the executive branch for the municipality. The legislative branch on the municipal level is going to be your city council. And we have 2 at-large members, and then we have seats A, B, C, D, and E. 4 of those seats are being challenged. 1 of them does not have a challenger. And the city council is going to be the legislative branch. So they pass the laws, they approve the budget, things like that. And then the judicial branch is going to be our courts, right? So we have our court system here in New Orleans. So I just want to provide that context of the relationship amongst those positions. We don't have any judicial races this particular election cycle, but oftentimes we are familiar with the separation of powers on a federal level, with the president of the United States, with Congress being the legislative branch, the Supreme Court and Article 3 being those courts. And then on a state level, we have the governor, who would be the executive branch. We have the state senators and state representatives, which would be the legislative branch. And then we also have the courts as well. With the Louisiana Supreme Court and then our respective appellate courts. So that's some orientation. And now let's dive into New Orleans. If you've been in New Orleans at all the last year, you have been hearing a lot of conversation about the race for mayor. Some of you might know Portia Chiffon has second citizenship in New Orleans. She's down here all the time because we have a very amazing city. So Portia Chiffon, can you share with us a little bit from your perspective? What are the responsibilities of the mayor?
Absolutely. The mayor has several responsibilities, right? So the mayor, I mean, as a general matter, the mayor really oversees the day-to-day operations, right? And so they oversee the police department, the fire department, emergency medical, utilities. Those are essentially all of the or most of the areas that the mayor oversees day to day. So the heads of each of those departments report directly to the mayor. The mayor examines and approves spending the budget, right? The They can appoint judges. They, like I said before, or if I haven't said before, they can appoint the chief of police. They oversee or who oversees public safety. So that's essentially what the duties are of the mayor. Will, please fill in anything that I missed.
Yeah, we think about the mayor really setting the tone for the city, right? And what are the priorities that the city is interested in moving forward with? They are the representative of the city in various different stages, right? On a state level, a lot of you know that New Orleans, was a city much before Louisiana was a state, and the relationship that New Orleans has historically with Spain and with France. And so we know that sometimes the mayor of New Orleans can have opportunities to interact with other countries, essentially, based on that history. But the mayor sets the tone for the city. They help set different policies that we want in place. You talked about the budget. So the mayor does propose a budget, right, that ultimately gets approved by the city council. The mayor is often the face of the city. And when we think about who we want to represent the city, we want, a mayor and a candidate who is familiar with what the responsibilities are. And you often want to be thinking about what are the qualifications that you want to have with the mayor. But when you are voting for a mayor, what you're really doing is you're voting for that executive branch representation of the city of New Orleans. So that's the mayor's office, very generally. I want to pivot to our legislative branch. But before I do, actually, Portia Chaffan, when we think about the position of a mayor, and this is generally speaking, not necessarily unique to New Orleans, are there any connections between the mayor's office and our criminal legal system? I think you mentioned one about the chief of police, and the mayor does appoint the chief of police here. What other connections are on your mind?
So if you think about what that means, right? So if the mayor is their boss, right? The vision of the mayor, right? The directives of the mayor literally funnel down into our communities. So let's just begin with the lowest hanging fruit, which is the chief of police, right? And so what the mayor's priorities are, or what the chief of police's priorities are, and then those priorities then subsequently get told to police officers that go into our communities. And as we are all familiar, we know that police are responsible for um, investigating crime, arresting people, and that is essentially how cases begin and people get funneled into the criminal legal system. And then, if you choose to fight your case, go before jury. So that's sort of a long winded way, but really to show the origins of how choosing the right mayor really does trickle down directly to our community.
Yeah, we think about the origins of the start of a case. That's going to happen with an arrest, right? And thinking about the types of policies that the mayor can help set as it relates to what do we want the approach to public safety to be in New Orleans, the mayor kind of can help set that tone with who is ultimately selected to be the chief of police for the city and the superintendent of the police department. Okay, I want to pivot to city council unless there's other things that come to mind as it relates to the mayor's connection to the criminal legal system. And if something does come to mind, we'll bring it up. But let's talk about the legislative branch, the city council. So from my perspective, the city council is the legislative branch. They're passing the ordinances. Now you will know that the city council has a couple of different tools that they can use to help inform or declare policy. So if the city council passes an ordinance, right, that is going to be the new law on the city level. If they pass a resolution is more symbolic, right? It doesn't necessarily have that enforcement of law behind it, but sometimes the symbolic nature it can be important depending on the matter. As I mentioned, we have 2 at-large seats, and those 2 at-large seats are considered to be the president of the council and the vice president of the council. And every 2 years, those positions switch between those 2 individuals who are the at-large members. We then have 5 different city council seats representing different portions of the city. So we have Section A, we have Section B, District A, District B, District C, District D, and District E. But I'm blanking on whether or not we call them districts or not. I'm having a brain fart. I don't think it's district. Well, regardless, it'll come to me. We have those 5 different roles, and they are primarily responsible for their constituents in their particular district, right? So we have District E, where I live, is New Orleans East, right? One of the largest areas of New Orleans relating to population and to size. And so District E, that council member is going to be responsible for the policies and representation of members in that particular district. When we think about policies that a city council can make, Portia Chiffon, what connections to the criminal legal system can you think about as it relates to the city council's connection to the criminal legal system?
Absolutely. I mean, because the city council creates ordinances that one must follow, right? If one violates the ordinance, you as a juror are potentially responsible, right? For deciding whether or not, am I saying that right or wrong, Will?
Which part?
Any of it.
Sounds good to me.
I just need to, because let me tell you something. For those of y'all who are like me, who dozed off during this portion or multiple days of civics class, I really did have to brush up on my civic who does what, where, when, how. And so I definitely could be, misstating some things. So I want to double check because I also want to be an informed person.
I got you.
Just like I thought that the mayor is the one who approves, the mayor is the one who gets the budget presented to them. Yeah. Proposed to them. To them. But what I was really trying to say is, because ordinances are created by the city council, as a prospective juror, you are the individual in the community that will potentially be charged with the duty of determining whether or not somebody followed that ordinance or didn't. Did I say that correct?
Yep.
Now, since we all agree that Will agrees that I said that right, there's one shameless plug that I always want to do. So, since you have the power to sit in judgment and decide whether or not an individual has violated an ordinance, you also have the power, if you disagree with the ordinance, you have the power to nullify.
Let me make
I always want to pop that in whenever I go. You can always make a distinction.
Yeah.
I think I know exactly where the distinction is headed. Go ahead. I realized it just now. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. In Louisiana, we have a Louisiana criminal code, which has our state laws, right? And in Louisiana, you're entitled to a jury for felony cases, but you're also entitled to a jury. But
not local ordinances.
Right. You're entitled to a jury for what we call Duncan misdemeanors, which is a misdemeanor where the punishment could be up to a year. So you're entitled to a trial for those types of misdemeanors. When we're talking about ordinances that city council passes, if a person is arrested on an ordinance or a municipal violation, you're going to go to municipal court. And in municipal court, you're only going to be arguing to a judge. So we are going to be
right. You know what? My apologies. Right after I said it, I realized it. Will, I think there's a lag between us.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think there's actually a lag. Now we both pausing.
The clarity that I want to provide is around when the jury is really going to be, at play. And that's going to be relating to state laws that have been passed by our state legislature, right? When it comes to the municipal code, which the city council can provide ordinance for, those, if people are arrested for violating the municipal code, they won't have access to a jury because those are largely going to be misdemeanors. If somebody commits an offense that's arrestable by a felony, then they're going to go through our criminal district court as opposed to our municipal court. But you're right that city council sets and approves the laws in our municipal code for criminal enforcement. And people, when NOPD is arresting somebody, they can charge you underneath the municipal code, or they can charge you underneath the state code. Now, the mayor can have instructions, and the city council can have instructions to NOPD as it relates to what types of crimes they want NOPD to be arresting people under. One example, in New Orleans, weed or cannabis is not legal. Okay, it has not been legalized, but it has in some instances kind of been decriminalized. And we might be thinking, well, what's the difference? There has been an effort and a promotion to demonstrate utilizing NOPD resources to address public safety issues as it relates to incidents of violence, and to ensure that they aren't responding to elements relating to like simple possession of weed. The instruction has been to not enforce the state code, the state law relating to cannabis possession, and simply just not arrest. So it hasn't been legalized, but it's been decriminalized, which is kind of a term of art.
That makes total sense. And actually, after I said it, I realized, because here in New York, we don't call them ordinances, we call them essentially summonses, right? And when you get a summons in New York, which is incredibly similar, they're often for quality of life crimes, right? They're often for lower level things where you don't get a jury, you only are speaking to the judge, and you often, like at worst, you will have to pay a fine. And so I was thinking about it a step above a summons, and as soon as you said it, I realized it. So my bad, y'all, members of the
No,
jury.
you're good. You're good. And this is part of why we're doing this, right? We sometimes can use additional clarification in terms of what these positions do. So we know that the mayor, right, is the executive branch. They help set the tone for the city. They help set the policy. They propose the budget. They represent the city on the local and the national and the global stage. City council is going to be that legislative branch passing those ordinances. Now, when we think about money bail, the city council in 2017 or maybe 2016 passed an ordinance essentially requiring money bail for only 5 offenses in municipal court. So they effectively eliminated pretrial detention for money bail in all the other criminal portions of the code. And the crimes that required money bail included simple battery, battery on a police officer, assault with a weapon, and maybe illegally carrying of a firearm. So I'd have to double check that. But the focus of the city council was trying to ensure that bail was only being requested or applied for crimes that had a direct correlation with potentially violent behavior. Everything else didn't require a bail bond. So when we're thinking about the relationship between the city council and our criminal legal system, they do play a role for municipal court and the laws that are being enforced in municipal court, and the prime example being money bail and the policy around money bail. Portraits of Fun, we have a question. Of these positions, whose decisions do we feel first on the citizen level? What do you think?
My instinct is always going to say police, right? My instinct is going to say police just because, police or sheriffs, depending on where you live, right? Here in New York City, the bulk of our interactions are with police and not necessarily sheriffs. Sheriffs oftentimes here in the Bronx serve more of an administrative role. But I'll say for citizens, I would say it's always police. You know, if you have an issue, whether it be noise, whether it be some type of citizen concern, you call the police. You don't call the mayor. You don't call the city council. You don't call the clerk of the city of whatever district you're in, right? It's the police you call first. So it's the police that I would personally say um, the citizens go first.
And when we think about who appoints the head of the police department, it's going to be the mayor, right? So that's that connection. When we're thinking about policing policy in New Orleans, and who do we elect that can kind of concretely influence what policing looks like in New Orleans, it's going to be the mayor. Now, in recent year, or maybe like the last year or two, we have had the city council kind of implement a checks, like an appointment review process. So when the mayor wants to appoint the chief of police, there's going to be a kind of a vetting by city council. And that's very similar to what we see on the federal level. When the president wants to appoint the secretary of transportation or the Department of Justice, attorney general, whoever it might be, the Senate reviews and kind of confirms. So this is about checks and balances on the local level. So when we're thinking about how citizens can directly experience who their results of who they're voting for, this is an example. You know, who you elect for mayor and their perspective on what policing can look like in New Orleans. They're going to be the ones who appoint the actual chief of police with the approval of the city council.
Absolutely. And one thing that I want to head note for folks is as you're thinking about who to vote for, you know, oftentimes the platforms that individuals run on are often influenced by their own perspectives and experiences, but they're also influenced by others. So I would encourage folks to do deep dives on individuals, no matter what position you're voting for, to see what these folks have actually done. Oftentimes too, you know, people will say one thing and do another. So I do want to encourage folks, you know, to think about, you know, what these candidates have actually done to and for communities. Specifically, you know, just like the questions asked, thinking about, you know, these positions and who's going to fill them first. And you know, it appears that me and will agree that the police is the place that citizens will feel it first. So electing someone that has positions and policies that are aligned with yours is incredibly important.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about the assessor, which is a unique role, right? I have the privilege of being a homeowner. And every year I get that damn letter in the mail from the assessor talking about my property taxes. And the property taxes have gone up. I'm like, but it's the same house. Like, what's going on here? Why am I paying more? So we're thinking about the role of the assessor. It allows an assessment of property values in the city and in different neighborhoods. And so we're thinking about what our property taxes look like and how much money are we paying. And you all know, like if you have a mortgage, oftentimes when you pay a mortgage, there's already a portion of that mortgage that's being collected to be able to pay the taxes, the property taxes for your home. But if you own your home outright and you don't have a mortgage, then you are kind of going to be footing the bill on the tail end, directly just kind of paying that property tax. So we think about taxes, and is there a connection between taxes in our criminal legal system? Now, I haven't dived into what our property taxes support, but I want to use an old example that many of us are familiar with around the country, and this isn't necessarily unique to New Orleans. But historically, when we think about school funding, oftentimes there's been the relationship between the taxes that are collected from home ownership and homeowner taxes or property taxes can support the local quote unquote neighborhood school. Now we've shifted away a little bit from this model of having neighborhood schools that are supported by the property taxes of the adjacent neighborhood. But I want to ask you, Portia, when we think about the connection between taxes and education, but more importantly, education in our criminal legal system, what comes to mind for you?
Education in our criminal legal system, it's always going to be, for me, the school to prison pipeline, right? And it literally does go back to the mayor's policies, and sort of what the mayor's directives are, right? Which is ultimately given to police chiefs, and these get trickled down directly into communities. And so the idea that students need police inside of their schools, right? Students going through metal detectors, students being searched. Instead of, there being a focus on mediation and arbitration, students are now being handcuffed. And, I've definitely seen instances where toddlers, right, are being escorted out of school by police. And that's probably the the thing that comes fastest to mind when I'm thinking about police and school, or education and police.
Yeah. So the connection between property taxes and education is really, that's a fundamental aspect of how public education is funded. And you speak to anybody in New Orleans, one of the big criticisms about our education system, and you read that the text is like the charter school system literally has in its language after Hurricane Katrina, like that the charter school system in New Orleans is going to be an experiment. And you speak with New Orleanians who are tired of being experimented on, right? And we know that this connection between property taxes and school funding, if the assessor is potentially raising taxes in a particular area, then that potentially creates more revenue for the community school if one exists, if that's the arrangement in your jurisdiction. But if you have lower property values in neighborhoods that perhaps aren't seen to be occupied by more wealthy homes or wealthy individuals and more expensive homes, then we have a correlation. So let me just break it down. If you live in a quote unquote poor neighborhood, and I'm just using that as a generalization, and your property values are lower, then that means that there's less funding that can go towards the school, right? But if you live in a quote unquote rich neighborhood, property taxes might be higher. There's more funding that's going to be able to go towards education. And then we already talked about that connection between the quality of education and connection with the criminal legal system, or the presence of police officers in our school. So there is a relationship that we don't always necessarily talk about with the assessor. I think for those of us who might be homeowners, our immediate reaction is, how are our property taxes being used to support our communities? And are there ways in which we can kind of expand the utilization of those dollars to best serve our communities?
In New York, they used to call it the broken glass theory, right? And they used to talk about neighborhoods that were significantly underfunded, kind of being like, well, what's the point of funding those areas if the glass is broken? The people in the community don't seem to care about their community, so that glass is just going to keep breaking and breaking and breaking. So why not fix it? So why fix it at all? And that sort of bleeds into so many areas, right? That bleeds into cleaning up a community. That bleeds into the type of books, the type of teachers, the type of programming that also go into schools as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, we sometimes talk about our criminal legal system as being the catch basin for the failures of these other systems. And when we want to improve what our criminal legal system looks like from a numbers perspective, as it relates to the number of people that are, having contact with the system, we have an opportunity to improve these other systems in terms of access to fair housing, access to quality education, right, or access to jobs. So this education piece, there is certainly a correlation between education, the quality of education, and the people who are in contact with our criminal legal system. There's a reality in New Orleans that 85% of the people who come through Tulane and Broad, and that's the nickname for our criminal legal system, because those are the names of the intersecting streets at the courthouse. People who are having contact with the criminal legal system who are coming through Tulane and Broad, about 85% of them are represented by public defenders. And so there's actually a demonstration that the majority of the people who are coming through our criminal legal system are at the poverty line, right, or below the poverty line because they can't afford an attorney. And so thinking about ways in which, if we can improve our education, can education be that segue into, kind of emerging out of poverty? It's something that can be further discussed. The next role I want to talk about is the sheriff of New Orleans. I'll describe generally my perspective of what the sheriff does in New Orleans, and then I'll ask you to comment about the connection to the criminal legal system, and then if there is any connection to our jury box. So in New Orleans, our sheriff is responsible for staffing both criminal court and civil court. And part of civil court, you're going to be serving subpoenas. In criminal court, there's a whole subpoena unit to get people to come. But the main responsibility is protecting and serving the people who are in our jail. Many of you know that we have had a jail in New Orleans, a jail system in New Orleans that used to be very, very big. So when Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, there were more than 7,238 people in the custody of the Orleans Parish Sheriff. And we had multiple jail buildings spread out adjacent to the intersection of Tulane and Broad. And after Hurricane Katrina happened, it really kind of exposed the overcrowding of our jail. And one of the things that contributed to the overcrowding of our jail was that we incarcerated, or we housed, people who were serving Department of Corrections time, as well as people who were in jail pre-trial, meaning that their case had not been decided yet. After Hurricane Katrina, there was a concerted effort to really reduce our jail size. And what ended up being approved after Hurricane Katrina was to build a jail facility with a bed capacity of 1,438. That's a huge reduction in our footprint from the amount of people that we were incarcerating at the time of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. And I just want to name for the naysayers out there, New Orleans reduced its prison population drastically in conjunction with a decrease in crime. With the exception of the pandemic, crime has been going down. And in New Orleans right now, 2025, we have seen violent crime go down year after year after year for the last 5 years. So when we think about the role of our sheriff, it's literally staffing people, sheriff deputies in court. It includes bringing people to court if they're incarcerated, like transporting them from the jail to the courthouse. It's serving subpoenas. But then there's also an outward-facing role that the sheriff sometimes plays as it relates to supporting the community. And our sheriff's office actually has a victim services unit that I learned a lot about last night. They also have a school in our jail. And sometimes people might think, well, why would you want a school in our jail? Well, we incarcerate young people. We incarcerate kids. And just because that they are in jail doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to continue their learning. Or we incarcerate young people who haven't obtained their GED, or I think it's called a high set now. And so they can obtain their degree in the school. It's called Travis Hill. So that's kind of an overview of what the sheriff does in New Orleans. And I talked a little bit about the connections to the criminal legal system, but I'd love to hear from you, Portia Chiffon. What are some of those other connections that can be drawn between the sheriff and our criminal legal system?
Well, first, I want to note, if folks haven't realized that, I want to note just the difference between the sheriff and police, right? Mm-hmm. So the chief of police is obviously appointed by the mayor, right? So that's his boss, right? Or that's their boss, right? The sheriff is elected by the people. And so they absolutely should be in the community. They absolutely should be a face for the community. They absolutely should be providing things that are necessary because, more times than not, jail is not the end of it for most individuals, right? If we truly care about redemption and to stop recidivism, then you are going to provide the things that are necessary to thwart that, even while a person is incarcerated. So it's incredibly important to do that. It's interesting because when I was thinking about the mayor, about the sheriff, I've always thought about it as an incredibly similar function to police, but with even more responsibility, right? When I was really thinking about the difference between sheriffs and police, and based on what you described, the sheriffs do way more than I even realized, because here in New York, most of the things that you described are done by multiple agencies here in New
Mm.
York. So,
Hmm.
I know in some jurisdictions, the sheriff actually also enforces all laws, also can make arrests, right? Also can investigate crimes. But there's clearly a distinction between that in New Orleans. But I know in other jurisdictions that's not the case. But specifically here in New York, sheriffs almost have more of an administrative function. We have police officers to enforce laws, investigate crimes, make arrests. We have court officers that maintain the order in the court. And we have a Department of Corrections that deals with all things jail. So it's fascinating.
Mm.
Um, it is incredibly fascinating to hear you talk about the function of a sheriff specifically in New Orleans. But the one thing that doesn't change across the board is the fact that a sheriff is elected.
Yeah. The sheriff, you know, has a limited role in policy, right? Um, there the sheriff is really only responsible for the people who are brought to the jail. They don't serve a policing function in New Orleans. In Jefferson Parish, neighboring parish, they do. But in New Orleans, the sheriff is only responsible for the people who are brought to the jail. And so when we're having conversations about the size of the jail population, you really cannot look to the sheriff to do anything about that per se, because they don't control who is brought to the jail. We have the police that are making the arrests, right? And then we have prosecutors who are instituting cases and requesting bond amounts, right? And requesting bail. And so there are different actors who are contributing to the jail population. And the primary responsibility of the sheriff is to make sure that when people are brought to the jail, that they're safe, that they're taken care of, they have the resources that they need. And unfortunately, in America, we've seen people brought to jail who have died. And nobody goes to jail thinking that they're going to die. And ultimately, we want to make sure that our sheriff is going to be responsible in keeping people safe, both from a perspective of like conditions of incarceration, but also ensuring that people are protected while they're in custody of the sheriff during transportation and things like that. Any other connections you can think of that we should be thinking through in electing a sheriff?
I think empathy,
Mm.
and I'm going to be quite honest with you. I think that that is an important, that's important for the mayor. That's important for police chiefs, that's important for the sheriff, specifically because, based on exactly what you said, right? The sheriff has so much contact with the community members, with citizens, that it is vital that they possess empathy. It is vital that they are capable from to look beyond themselves and potentially try to put themselves in the shoes of others in the community. You it doesn't make you, weak on crime, as folks often like to say, to really have empathy, to really give people breaks, to really think about what the ramifications are of an arrest, of being processed through the criminal legal system, and the impact that that has on the larger community. So if I could think of anything that, I want a candidate that I'm voting for that has a very community facing role, it would always be empathy.
Yeah, we have a question as it relates to, do all jails have libraries? And it's a really good question. Not all jails have libraries. And when I hear this question, I'm also thinking specifically about a legal library, right? Sometimes people who are incarcerated are their best advocates. And there has been efforts over the years to ensure that people who are incarcerated have access to what's called the Louisiana Criminal Code, right? So they can actually have understanding of the statutes, the laws, essentially the ways in which they are being charged, to fully understand what arguments they potentially can make. But I'm not familiar with there being a requirement that jails have libraries. And so when we think about how can a sheriff help promote and have kind of empathy for people who are incarcerated, who, if we're just being honest, sometimes it's hard for our community to be concerned about people in jail because we forget about the presumption of innocence. But even if we don't forget about the presumption of innocence, sometimes we associate people with jail as all being bad people. And because they're quote unquote bad people, they don't deserve to have access to um, legal books or representation or amenities, whatever it might be. Uh, I never speak for Portia Chaffan, but as a fellow public defender, I know we do this work because we believe in the Constitution's declaration that everybody is entitled to an attorney, and if you can't afford one, you're going to be provided one. So when we think about the libraries in our jails, that's something that a sheriff can influence. Like, what are the types of resources that incarcerated people can have access to? Now, of course, there's safety that is going to be part of that conversation. Typically, you're going to have soft bound or soft covered books that can be accessible, but generally, we don't have a requirement that there's going to be libraries in our jails. We have another question. Where do state police or state troopers fit into this conversation, and who has jurisdiction over them? So I'll take that question, and then I'll have you chime in, Portia Chaffan. So state troopers are governed or kind of report to the governor, right? So Louisiana state troopers are the state's policing agency. The New Orleans Police Department is the city's policing agency. So the governor appoints the chief of the Louisiana State Troopers, and the mayor appoints the chief of the New Orleans Police Department. In terms of who has jurisdiction over Louisiana State Troopers, many of you know that we have Louisiana State Troopers in New Orleans. The jurisdiction over those Louisiana State Troopers is going to be the governor's office. The governor has power to send Louisiana State Troopers to any jurisdiction in the state for whatever reason he wants. In New Orleans, there's kind of a cooperative effort between NOPD and Louisiana State Troopers for policing in the city. The tension there is the New Orleans Police Department is under a federal consent decree. The Louisiana State Troopers are not. As part of the federal consent decree, there have been efforts in New Orleans to really serve as a model of what constitutional policing looks like. But unfortunately, Louisiana State Troopers do not have to abide by the consent decree in New Orleans because they weren't part of that original lawsuit. But I can say I've had conversations with many members of the New Orleans community who are concerned about the Louisiana State Troopers and their tactics and how they are different than the New Orleans Police Department. We've had conversations about Ronald Green and how the representation of how he died was actually false, right? The representations by the state troopers was that he crashed into a tree and died, when in reality, looked at the dash camera, when they ultimately stopped Ronald Green, he's still walking, but it was actually him being killed by the state troopers after that caused his death. There's another example in terms from a jurisdiction perspective. The United States Constitution, right, has jurisdiction over the state troopers as well. So even though they are a state agency, there's still a requirement of who is required, of what type of behavior is acceptable by the Louisiana State Police and who is not. But when it comes to local elections, there isn't a person that you're going to be voting for that ultimately is going to have influence over the state troopers. What connection can you think of, Portia Chaffan, relating to the connection between state troopers and our criminal legal system and our jury? Is there anything that comes to mind that I may not have mentioned?
So, I mean, I guess the only thing that I would actually add is that, state troopers primarily focus on the roads, right? They primarily focus on investigating accidents. They primarily focus on disobeying highway laws. So a huge part of, oftentimes why we see a lot of these cases that are involving state troopers is on the highway, is that that's oftentimes their primary focus. It's not their only focus. They absolutely do investigate crimes. And whenever you have police involved in any community, folks are ripe for being funneled through the criminal legal system. And then you, as a community member, have to make a determination about whether or not a law was violated and whether or not you agree with that law, and you can nullify.
Most of the time in New Orleans, we're seeing Louisiana State Police patrol downtown, even before the governor sent the troopers in the last couple of years. The Louisiana State Police have been present on Bourbon Street to be another kind of show of force to try to promote safety on Bourbon Street. Right now, there has been the creation of something called Troop NOLA is the name of it. Previously, when I would say like 2013 to 2018, there was something called Troop B, which their headquarters is in. I guess that would be Kenner, yeah, and they would essentially come into the city to do their work. And so I only bring that up because I agree with you. In most jurisdictions, state troopers are kind of governing the interstate and the highways and the roads. In New Orleans, we've seen a lot of presence of the state troopers when it comes to the French Quarter.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's more, the presence is more after the January 1st incident, because I can absolutely say, as someone who often stays downtown, I've seen far more state troopers than I've seen in past years. And it feels like more of, well, actually, I'll just withdraw that because I don't know what they were
for. So we've talked about the mayor, we've talked about city council, we've talked about the sheriff, we've talked about how the mayor appoints a chief of police, we talked about the assessor. Let's talk about the criminal clerk of court. So generally speaking, when I am at the courthouse at Tulane and Broad and I need to file some motions, I go to the clerk's office. Right. So one of the roles that the clerks play is they're maintaining, they are the quote unquote custodian of records for the criminal cases, right? They got my filings in there. They have the prosecution's filings in there. If the judges have issued, written rulings, that's going to be included. Essentially, everything about that case is going to be in that file that's held by the clerk's office. In New Orleans, uniquely, the clerk of court also oversees, they're considered to be the chief of elections. So they're overseeing the poll workers and the poll machines and really play a critical role in the various elections that we have in New Orleans. The clerk of court's office is housed within the criminal court building at Tulane and Broad. It's up on the second floor. And when we think about their function and their role, one of the many important things in a case is being able to have an accurate record. And when a case is being reviewed, you want that record to be accurate so that you can ensure justice was carried out. There's a huge role between the clerk's office and jury selection in New Orleans, and that's as it relates to summonses. Can you share with us your thoughts generally about this connection between the clerk of court and our juries?
Absolutely. They are, specifically in New Orleans, and generally, they are responsible for sending out those juror summons. They're the first person, oftentimes, besides the sheriffs in New Orleans courts, they're the first people after folks are searched and brought through the courthouse entrance. The clerks are the first people that are greeting jurors. They're also responsible for juror pay in New Orleans. So in addition to managing documents, they also have a customer service role for citizens that are coming in to engage their civic duty.
Yeah, I had a colleague who told me they received their check, which unfortunately in New Orleans, you get paid $10 a day to serve. And they said they wanted to get their check framed. Like they didn't want to cash it. They just loved that was their representation of serving on a jury. And something that we're thinking about the Juror Project is we recognize that for some people, jury service is not a financial burden. If you have a salary job and you don't lose any of your compensation by serving on a jury, because it's kind of considered paid leave. Some people are like, look, I don't need that $10 because I'm still getting paid. But then we have other people who perhaps don't have that same type of support from their employer, where they don't get paid if they don't show up to work, and then all they're getting is $10 a day. Something that we're thinking about trying to introduce and propose is having an opportunity for an individual to use their discretion of whether or not they want to accept that $10 check. Because if I don't need it because my job is paying me, I can say, you know what, you can keep the $10, and that can create more funds that are available to support people who might need it. So that's something that we're thinking through. But when we're thinking about juror pay, the state sets the amount that has to be paid. The clerk is the one who's going to be administering those payments, right? And so the lists that are going to be used to summon jurors in Orleans Parish in Louisiana are voter registration and DMV records. And so we think about ways in which clerks of court can do more than just sending out those summonses. They can make sure that they're getting the appropriate amounts of returns. And in some jurisdictions, we've seen policies that say they sent out 100 juror summonses to the 70128 zip code, but they only got 30 back. The clerk of court can think about ways in which they can promote policy to say, let's send 70 more summonses so that we can get an accurate representation of the 70128 zip code, right? So there's more proactive things that the clerk of court is able to do to ensure that they're helping assemble that fair cross-section. Now, I can't talk about juries without talking about a fair cross-section. But before I get into it, what other thoughts do you have, Portia?
I'm excited that you're doing that, because I think, when you first started the conversation about the clerk and sort of what their responsibilities are, keeping an accurate record is vital in all respects, right? To everyone. As a community member who wants to get proof of a resolution of a case in order to bring to a new job, right? As a defense attorney, I want to see, how things sort of transpired in a case that's old and the issue has now come back up again, right? So an accurate recording is vital to all members of the criminal legal system. But of course, we want to leave time for you to talk about fair cross section and how clerks are also vital in that role.
Yeah, so
and that issue rather.
Yeah, absolutely. You all know, because we've talked about it. The Constitution says an essential component, or excuse me, the Supreme Court has said an essential component of our Sixth Amendment right to a jury is to select that jury from a fair cross-section. So the clerk of court is really involved in making sure that that fair cross-section is assembled. So that means that we're getting people from uptown, that we're getting people from the east, that we're getting people from Lakeview, from Mid-City, from Gerttown, from Pigeontown. We're getting people from all over the place, right? And that's going to be our fair cross-section of New Orleans, because the role of the jury is to be a representative and a placeholder for the community values. But if we're only getting certain people who are responding to jurors from only one or two or three neighborhoods and not, all the different wards that we have, then we're not actually assembling that fair cross-section. That's not consistent with the Constitution. What questions do you all have? I was so encouraged to read the numbers of early voters. It is so much higher than it was the previous election. And what that means to me is that we are seeing New Orleanians wanting to be engaged with their government, and we are here for it, right? We talk so much about jury service, and jury service is a civic duty. And traditionally in America, when we talk about civic duties, sometimes we talk about military service. They used to have something called the draft, but that doesn't really exist anymore. But the draft and serving on a military is seen as a civic duty. The other civic duty we talk about all the time is voting, right? Talking about it now because it's important. The third civic duty that we're trying to bring more attention to is serving on a jury. And it is a privilege to be involved in shaping what your government looks like, but more specifically what our criminal legal system looks like and how you can participate on that jury to ensure that fairness is being carried out in our criminal legal system. What other thoughts do you have, Portia?
So, I just want to head note. Well, first thing I want to do is I want to highlight a comment. When we were talking about the clerk's responsibilities and how maintaining records is important, we did get a comment from the audience that says, right, because, accurate entries to records are vital too. And I want to head note that you are spot on. It's not just about putting this stuff in a file and then shelving it. It's also about making sure that what is in that file is an accurate reflection of what happened in the courtrooms in that building. You are 100% right. We also have a comment from a viewer who says, because they ain't never been called for jury duty. What? It's coming. I'm putting it out there in the ether. It is coming. It is coming. It is coming. But one thing that I do want to head note is that, I think sort of in our everyday existence, we really don't think about how the more local positions directly impact our quality of life, how police show up in our communities, how property taxes are assessed, and that directly relates to funding. And so all of those things are important, but I want to, for those people who are on this call who are just like, this entire system is violent, I don't want any parts of that. I hear you. I understand it, I get it, but it is vital that you also are making an informed, a fully informed decision, and that is why this
Mhm.
conversation is so vital. And so we really hope that you have walked away from it, feeling like you understand more now the connection to of these roles, not just to you as an individual, but the broader impact that it has on your communities.
That's right. I want to chime in as it relates to the accuracy of entries into our court records in Orleans Parish. We have a system, an online system that's called Docket Master, and the Docket Master system is essentially allows you to essentially look up a docket. Docket is the term that is used for the cases that are going to be called for that particular day in that particular section of court, and then they have case numbers. Those case numbers are 6 digits. It's like 543-657 or whatever it is. That's generated by the clerk of courts, and that's the number that's assigned to a particular case. In every courtroom in Orleans Parish, there is somebody whose title is called a minute clerk. And what they are doing, let's say a case gets called, and the minute clerk is going to record which attorneys are present for the prosecution, which attorneys are present for the defense on behalf of the particular people who are accused of a crime. If a hearing has taken place, the minute clerk will say motion to suppress was granted or motion to suppress was denied, whatever it might be. That entry then becomes part of the docket master for that case. And when you think about a docket master, these are just short little summaries every time that case was called over the course of the life of that case. If one of those minute entries is not accurate, it can become confusing as to what actually took place in that case, because 3 years later, 4 years later, 20 years later, people's memories aren't going to be as accurate as we would want them to be. So then we look at that minute entry, but if that minute entry is wrong, it can create a complete misunderstanding of what actually took place in that case. If you're interested in a little bit more of an explanation of an example of that in New Orleans, we put out a video, I think maybe last week, that explained the crux of a minute entry and how it led to conversations about what was true and what's not true as it relates to what took place in a particular case.
Will, in our last 2 minutes, we got two questions that I'd love to respond to. One is, how does the clerk select jurors? The second is, some dope person went to our website so that you can volunteer. And so we also want to uplift that as well.
Yeah, you can volunteer in Orleans Parish by being responsive to what a lot of our judges have been promoting. They need more jurors so that our cases can, that people can go to trial and that they can have a jury of their peers. So you can volunteer in New Orleans, and what that looks like is you go to the courthouse, which is 2700 Tulane Avenue. You don't enter on the Tulane side. On the Broad side, there's going to be a juror entrance, and there's going to be a little path that's marked by yellow lines. You follow those yellow lines. It's going to take you to the jury commissioner room, and you ask them for the form to volunteer. You put your name, your information, and then they're going to ask you, when do you want to volunteer? And you can say, I want to volunteer beginning of November. So you'll be on call November 1st, November 15th, or something like that. You'll then get a summons in the mail, just as if you were randomly selected, and then you show up to the court for that time period. The other question is, how does the clerk select jurors? Is it a random draw? So the law says that the list that can be used to summon jurors include voter registration and DMV records. There's then a randomizer that is used to essentially send out those summonses. In Orleans Parish, if you serve on a jury, you're exempt from serving for the next 2 years. So your name will get removed from that list for a 2-year period. And then after that 2-year period is gone by, your name is then put back into the hopper. I don't think it's called a hopper, but that's what I'm calling it. Into the hopper for your name to be randomly selected. But you can either serve on a jury by volunteering, or you can wait until your name is selected from the randomization of those lists. Now, I will say, when we have people in New Orleans who have been summoned for jury service 6-7 times, and their neighbor has not been summoned once, that's a problem. We should be equally distributing the opportunity to serve on juries, and the policy should be no person will be summoned twice before everybody is summoned once. And that's something that the clerk of court could take up. They could make sure that everybody's having equal access to the power of the jury box, and that we aren't oversaturating our requests for service for certain people while we're excluding others.
That was awesome.
I'm looking at, we have a couple more comments. One comment, I guess people can see it. I used to think in my younger days, but I know now that being part of a jury is way, I'm sorry. Let me read. I'm just going to read it as it's written instead of trying to fill things in. I used to think in my younger days, but I know not being part is way more detrimental. Yeah, so I think that what the commenter is getting at is the importance of serving on juries. And then last, we have a nice little appreciation note, appreciating us educating us on these processes. Portia Stefan, why don't you wrap it up for us?
Please, please, please answer those summonses when you are called. I know that the criminal legal system is violent, but you can absolutely change someone's lives. So when you're called, answer. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. We hope to see you on our next live. Be well, be safe, be ready to answer the summonses.
October 11th.
And go vote.
Go vote.
And go vote. Absolutely. Please go vote.
All right, y'all. All right. Thanks for joining.
Bye.